Okay, so in this video we are going to set up GlusterFS. Now I'm making a blog site. I've made my DB server already. I've made my load balancer already, which is here. Now I'm going to fire up a new server. Actually, first I'm going to add the network. So I want all my GlusterFS to have their own little network. It just makes everything easier. You don't have to add firewall rules or anything like that. Well, you just have to go, I'll show you even. Have to go UFW allow in on S2. Okay, now we'll create the web server. We'll call it web01. And we'll choose Ubuntu 14.04 PHPM. And we want to make it a 4 GB server so that it has the data disk that we can use to store the brick on, which is a GlusterFS brick. We'll add the network, so it wants to be in that private network. And away we go. So we'll just let that build and we'll come on to our next step. Okay, so here we are in Web 1, and I was expecting it to have an extra disk, XBD stuff, that I could store the GlusterFS brick on, but it's not there. So where I'm going to store it is in serve brick. Now I'm making it a hidden directory because we don't want the general operating system to have access there. We don't want to be reading and writing files. It's just for GlusterFS to store its data. Okay, now to install GlusterFS, it's really easy. Do apt-get update. I'll go apt-get install GlusterFS server, GlusterFS client. That was easy. And there we go. Okay, now we'll just do the firewall. UFW allow in on S2, because all the GlusterFS traffic is going to go over S2. And let's just see what our IP address is. Okay, 3.2. Okay, now we're going to create our first Gluster volume. So let's have a look first at the command. Gluster volume create help. There's a lot of options there, but we don't need all of those. We're just creating a single volume on a single server. So we'll call it main because we're only going to have one. We don't need stripes, we don't need replicas, we don't need a device. Transport will be TCP, and the first brick will be this server 3.2 that serve.brick. Now it's saying that we can't create it on the root partition and we should have another drive. We don't have one, so we're just going to go force. So now it's created. Let's have a look in Gluster volume status. Volume main is not started, so we need to start it up. Gluster volume start main. Now if we look at the volume status, we'll see that it's active. GlusterFS is serving the volume now through an NFS server, so we want to mount it. So here we are in the serve directory. Let's make another directory called GlusterFS. So if you see here, the .brick is where GlusterFS is storing its data. We don't want to actually read and write there. GlusterFS is where we're going to be mounting the actual files. So let's look at etc. hosts, GlusterFS tab, FS tab, and set it up. So we want to go, the source of the volume is localhost, and it uses the volume name that we gave in GlusterFS as the NFS server name, and we want to mount it at serve GlusterFS. The type is GlusterFS, and we'll just put defaults, and we'll put comma, I think it's netdev like that. We don't want any testing. So now if we go mount-a, find MNT, there we go. We can see it at the bottom. GlusterFS is it localhost main. So I just want to go over the FS tab options again. So you see here we're using localhost for the NFS server. That's great because it means if all the other servers go down, we'll still see the files on here. And serve GlusterFS, that's where we're mounting it. We'll come to that later. And underscore netdev, this tells the operating system, as you probably know, don't mount this until all the network is up, because we need localhost to work before we can mount it. You're probably thinking now, well, where are we going to put all the Apache files? Because they're normally in var .dub. And how are we going to put the Apache config, which is in etc Apache 2, onto the Gluster drive? We're going to use bind mounts. So first let me just install Apache. PHP, what do we need? Just PHP? PHP 5, I'm guessing. There we go. So now we've got etc Apache 2 is there. So what I'm going to do is just move it. Apache 2, probably a good idea to stop Apache first. Service Apache 2 stop. Move etc Apache 2. I'll just put the whole config in serve GlusterFS. And now remake the dir there. And mount using bind mounts. Serve GlusterFS Apache 2 to etc Apache 2. And the same thing, we'll move var .dub to serve GlusterFS and make dir. I should probably have a nice little script for this. var .dub and mount bind serve GlusterFS .dub to var .dub. We'll just show what we've got now. So we've got find mount. So serve GlusterFS is mounted on the NFS server. etc Apache 2 is bind mounted on there. So what we'll do to keep them permanent is just go edit etc FS tab. This is my cheaty way. I will just copy and paste it from M tab. Bam. Let's just have a look at that. So they're mounted via bind from the serve GlusterFS to etc Apache 2. Now we'll do the same for PHP session files. So if we look at the PHP config, save path, we can see that it's defaults nothing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make it save it straight into the serve GlusterFS sessions, I think. So that would be serve GlusterFS PHP sessions. Not sure if that's the best way to do it, but that's what I'm going to do. And let me just make that directory and make Apache own it. Serve GlusterFS PHP sessions ch on data serve GlusterFS PHP sessions. Now the moment of truth. Let's see if Apache starts. There we go. Woohoo! So I've put Web 1 in my load balancer. I've created a little WordPress site on there, as you can see there. So you can see again, var .dub is mounted on the NFS server. etc Apache is landed on the NFS server, and you can see my little website here, my WordPress site. If we go to serve GlusterFS, we can see the PHP sessions being saved there as well. Okay, so in our next video, we'll be setting up Web 2 and having it download and sync all that GlusterFS really quickly.